The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the combined frequencies of 8,000 civilizations. Ambassador Marcus Webb stood alone at the defendant's podium, a single human facing the collected wisdom of the known universe. Above him, the verdict screen pulsed with ominous red light. Species classification, Homo sapiens, announced the Council Prime, a being of pure crystallized thought from the Axiom Collective. After 300 cycles of observation, investigation, and direct interaction, this council has reached unanimous consensus. Marcus felt his heart hammering. Humanity had waited 2 centuries for this moment, official recognition and entry into the galactic community. He straightened his suit, ready to accept humanity's place among the stars. Humans are hereby declared immune to logic. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus blinked, certain he'd misheard through the translation field. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your species demonstrates persistent, pathological resistance to rational thought processes," continued the Council Prime. "You possess intelligence, yet deliberately refuse to employ it. You understand cause and effect, yet routinely expect different outcomes from identical actions. You are, by all measurable standards, logically incorrigible." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates, clicks, whistles, telepathic static, and sounds humans had no names for. Marcus detected what might have been cosmic pity. "That's absurd," Marcus protested. "We've built civilizations, developed quantum physics, created art and literature." "Precisely the problem," interrupted Counselor Vex, a floating geometric entity from the rationalist Imperium. "You possess the capacity for logic but actively choose chaos. Consider your own testimony from last session. You claimed your species follows their hearts when making important decisions. Hearts are pumping organs. They cannot process information. It's a metaphor. We know what metaphors are, Ambassador. That's not the issue. The issue is that you use metaphors when literal precision would save lives. Your militaries call fatal missions walking in the park. Your economists describe catastrophic collapses as corrections. You elected leaders based on gut feelings despite having computational analysis available." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't exactly argue with that. "Furthermore," added Counselor Tin, a hive mind representative appearing as a swarm of luminescent insects, "your species invented something called reality television, which is, by definition, neither reality nor television in the traditional sense. When questioned, you responded, 'Yeah, but it's entertaining.' Entertainment value as justification for linguistic paradox is not logical. What does this classification mean for humanity?" Marcus asked quietly. The Council Primes Form dimmed sympathetically. "You will be placed under compassionate quarantine. For your own protection, and the protection of rational species, Earth will remain isolated until you demonstrate capacity for consistent logical behavior. Preliminary estimates suggest, never. We estimate never." Marcus felt the weight of 200 years of hope crumbling. "There must be some appeal process." "Appeals require logical argumentation," said Vex. "See the problem?" The chamber lights began to dim, signaling the session's end. As Marcus was escorted out by security drones, he heard one counselor whisper to another, "Did you see what they did? They invented social media, devices to connect everyone, and used them primarily to argue with strangers and share pictures of their food. Immune to logic indeed." Marcus spent 3 sleepless nights in his quarters aboard the council station, reviewing the evidence files that had condemned humanity. The sheer volume was staggering, petabytes of data documenting humanity's apparent logical failures over 2 centuries of observation. He opened the first major exhibit, Economic Decisions. The file played holographic reconstructions of human stock markets. Alien analysts provided commentary, note how the human trader purchases high and sells low, repeatedly, despite this being objectively wrong. When questioned, the human responds, "I panicked." Panic is not a trading strategy. Another clip showed a human investor explaining cryptocurrency to a rational Imperium observer. "So you're saying," the alien had asked, "you invested your offspring's education savings into digital tokens whose value is determined entirely by whether other humans also believe they have value, backed by nothing physical, requiring immense energy consumption, and primarily used by criminals. It's the future, man. You wouldn't understand." "You are correct. I do not understand. Nor do I wish to." Marcus winced and moved to the next exhibit, Safety Protocols. This section featured countless examples of warning labels on human products. The aliens had compiled them into what they called the Paradox Museum. "Warning, coffee is hot," read one label. The commentary noted, "If humans require warning that heated beverages are hot, how did they master thermodynamics?" Another, "Do not use hairdryer while sleeping." Commentary, "This implies previous incidents. Multiple humans attempted this. We have questions we dare not ask." Marcus's favorite was, "Do not iron clothes while wearing them." The alien analyst had simply written, "Why," in 17 languages. The next section made Marcus groan, Historical Decisions. Subject, Human Military History, began the analysis. Despite possessing detailed records of past conflicts, including causes, costs, and consequences, humans repeat identical mistakes with stunning consistency. When confronted with this pattern, they respond, "This time it's different." It is never different. They know it is never different. They proceed anyway. A specific example highlighted humanity's approach to city planning. Observe, the human city called Houston. Built on a flood plain. Floods regularly. Humans rebuild. Same location. Every time. When asked why not relocate, humans respond, "We like it here." Preference does not negate hydrology. Marcus moved to what the council called their smoking gun evidence, communication patterns. The file opened with a simple scenario, a human couple discussing dinner plans. "Where do you want to eat?" asked the male. "I don't know, where do you want to eat?" replied the female. "I'm fine with anything." "Me too." 20 minutes of circular conversation followed, ending with both parties frustrated and no decision made. The alien commentary was succinct, both parties possessed the capacity to state preferences. Both possessed knowledge of available options. Both deliberately chose to withhold information, creating an unsolvable situation. They do this for social bonding. Making problems is recreation. Another example showed a human being asked, "How are you?" "Fine," the human responded, clearly distressed. "The human is not fine," noted the observer. Yet says fine. When pressed, becomes angry. Apparently humans expect others to decipher their true meaning through contextual interpretation rather than simply stating their actual condition. This is routine. They prefer inefficiency. Marcus rubbed his temples. The evidence was damning, but something bothered him. Every example was technically accurate, yet felt fundamentally unfair. Humans weren't illogical, they operated on a different kind of logic, one the aliens couldn't recognize. He drafted an appeal brief, knowing it was futile. But he had to try. Humanity's future depended on making beings of pure rationality understand something inherently irrational, that humans could be right even when they were wrong. As he worked through the night, Marcus couldn't shake the irony, he was attempting a logical argument for illogical behavior. The council would call this more proof of humanity's condition. They'd probably be right. The appeals chamber was smaller than the main council hall, designed for intimate deliberations. Only 3 judges presided, Council Prime, Vex from the Rationalist Imperium, and newcomer Judge Kessler from the Probability Collective, a species that existed in quantum superposition until observed. Marcus stood before them with his carefully prepared arguments. He'd spent every waking hour crafting what he hoped was an airtight logical case. If humans were immune to logic, he'd prove them wrong by being perfectly logical. "Honorable judges," Marcus began, his voice steady. I submit that the Council's diagnosis is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human cognition. We are not immune to logic, we employ a broader definition of logic that incorporates variables your analysis excluded. Council Prime's crystalline structure refracted light thoughtfully. Explain. Take the economic decisions you cited. The human who sold stock during a panic wasn't being illogical, they were employing survival heuristics developed over millions of years. In ancestral environments, immediate action during threat detection increased survival odds. The response is logical within evolutionary context. Evolutionary logic became obsolete when you developed mathematics, Vex countered. You possess superior tools but ignore them. That's not broader logic, it's choosing inferior methods. Marcus pressed on. Consider this scenario. A logical alien species encounters a burning building. Sensors indicate a 0.3% chance of successfully rescuing occupants, with 98% probability of rescuer death. Logic dictates, do not enter. A human enters anyway, knowing the odds. Is this illogical? Judge Kessler flickered between states. Objectively, yes. But humans understand something your calculus excludes. The value of trying. The moral weight of action versus inaction. The psychological impact on communities when members demonstrate willingness to sacrifice for others. These factors don't fit neat probability matrices, but they're not illogical, they're operating on humanistic logic. Humanistic logic, Vex repeated, and Marcus swore he heard skepticism. Is that what you call making decisions based on feelings instead of data? No, it's making decisions based on the full spectrum of available information, including emotional and social data that your species may process differently or not at all. Council Prime leaned forward. Ambassador, your coffee cup label. Contents hot. Explain the logic. Marcus had prepared for this. Not all humans have the same baseline knowledge. Children, elderly persons with cognitive impairment, individuals from different cultural backgrounds, the label protects vulnerable populations. It's anticipatory logic, addressing potential scenarios rather than assuming universal understanding. So you label everything for the least capable members? Vex asked. We design for inclusivity, yes. That's inefficient. Perhaps. But it's ethically logical. The judges conferred silently for a moment. Then Kessler spoke, Ambassador Webb, you're attempting to argue that humanity operates on alternative logic frameworks. But your own evidence undermines this. You've demonstrated situational logic, sometimes emotional, sometimes mathematical, sometimes ethical, with no consistent methodology. That's not alternative logic. That's selective logic application, which by definition is illogical. Marcus felt his carefully constructed argument crumbling. So what would prove we're logical? Consistency, said Council Prime simply. Logical beings apply logical principles consistently across contexts. You do not. You employ logic when convenient and abandon it when not. That's precisely what immunity to logic looks like. A desperate idea struck Marcus. What if I could prove that inconsistency itself is a logical strategy? The judges paused. Vex's geometric form rotated slowly. That would be interesting. Explain. In game theory, unpredictability is advantageous. A perfectly logical opponent is predictable, therefore exploitable. Humans evolved in competitive environments against other intelligent humans. Being consistently logical would make us vulnerable. Strategic inconsistency, appearing to violate logic, is therefore the logical approach to survival among other intelligent beings capable of modeling our behavior. Silence fell over the chamber. Finally, Judge Kessler spoke, their form solidifying into something almost impressed. You're arguing that humans are so logical, you evolved to appear illogical as a survival mechanism? Yes. That's the most convoluted justification for chaos we've ever heard, said Vex. But is it wrong? The judges looked at each other. Marcus held his breath. We will design a test, Council Prime announced after a long deliberation. If humans can demonstrate consistent logical superiority through strategic unpredictability, we will reconsider the classification. Marcus should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt dread. He'd talked himself into something, but wasn't sure what. What kind of test? He asked cautiously. Vex's geometric form expanded, projecting a holographic scenario. We'll place a human in a controlled game theory environment against our best strategic AI. If your thesis is correct, if human unpredictability is actually calculated logic, your representative should win. If it's merely chaos masquerading as strategy, they'll lose. What are the stakes? Victory, Earth's quarantine ends. Defeat, humanity accepts permanent isolation and mandatory logic tutoring programs for the next millennium. Marcus swallowed hard. Who chooses the human representative? You do. But choose wisely, Ambassador. This person will determine your species' future. Back on Earth 3 weeks later, Marcus faced an impossible decision. Who could represent humanity in a contest of logic versus controlled chaos? A chess grandmaster. Too predictable. A military strategist. Too by the book. An economist? After the evidence presented, absolutely not. He consulted with Earth's governments, but committees created only committees. Time was running out. In desperation, Marcus did something the aliens would definitely call illogical. He asked his grandmother for advice. You're overthinking it, sweetie, Grandma Rose said over video call, knitting what appeared to be a sweater with no armholes. You need someone who's smart but doesn't think they're smart. Someone who trusts their gut but can explain why. Someone weird. That's not helpful, Grandma. Sure it is. You need Eddie. Eddie who? Your cousin Eddie. The one who won $50,000 on that game show by betting everything on a question he didn't know the answer to. Marcus vaguely remembered the incident. Eddie had wagered it all on, what is the capital of Assyria? He hadn't known. He'd guessed, Assur, based purely on, it sounds right. He was correct. Grandma, that's luck, not logic. Is it though? He said later he figured most people would overthink it, look for complicated answers. So he went simple. That strategy. Marcus rubbed his face. This was insane. But then again, everything about this situation was insane. Maybe that was precisely the point. He found Eddie working as a wilderness guide in Colorado, teaching tourists how to avoid bear attacks. Eddie listened to Marcus explain the situation while absent-mindedly whittling a stick into a smaller stick. So you want me to play games against an alien supercomputer to prove humans are secretly logical by being illogical? Eddie summarized. When you put it that way, it sounds stupid. It is stupid. I'm in. 3 weeks later, Eddie arrived at the council station wearing hiking boots, cargo shorts, and a t-shirt reading, I do my own stunts. The council judges regarded him with what Marcus interpreted as deep concern. This is your champion? Vex asked. He looks underprepared. Looks can be deceiving, Marcus replied, hoping desperately that was true. Eddie waved casually at the assembled aliens. Hey folks. Ready to play some games? The test chamber was stark, a white room with 2 chairs facing a holographic interface. Eddie sat across from Logos 7, the Rational Imperium's most advanced strategic AI, appearing as a floating silver sphere. The rules, Council Prime announced, are simple. A series of games testing prediction, strategy, and decision-making. Best of 7. Begin. The first game appeared, a variant of the prisoner's dilemma with 17 iterations. Logos 7 calculated optimal strategies in microseconds. Eddie scratched his chin, then selected seemingly random options. He won. The second game, resource allocation across variable probability scenarios. Eddie lost, badly. Third game, pattern recognition and prediction. Eddie stared at the patterns for 30 seconds, then started humming. He won. By Game 5, the council judges were conferring in urgent whispers. Eddie was winning, but his methodology was incomprehensible. He made objectively wrong choices that somehow produced right outcomes. He ignored obvious strategies, pursued irrational paths, and yet. How? Vex demanded after Eddie won Game 6. How are you doing this? Eddie shrugged. Dunno, man. I'm just vibing. Vibing is not a strategy. Isn't it though? Marcus watched, simultaneously proud and terrified. Eddie was proving his point perfectly, that human unpredictability was a feature, not a bug. But as Game 7 loaded, the deciding match, Marcus wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. Eddie's approach worked, but could anyone, even Eddie himself, explain why? And if they couldn't explain it logically, had they really proven anything at all? Game 7 materialized before them, a complex simulation of diplomatic negotiation involving 12 factions with competing interests. Logos 7 would play as one faction, Eddie as another. The goal, maximize your faction's position over 50 turns while maintaining galactic stability. It was the kind of scenario that took trained diplomats years to master. Eddie had about 30 seconds to understand the rules. This is our most sophisticated test, Council Prime announced. It requires balancing short-term gains against long-term consequences, predicting multiple actors' behaviors, and adapting to emergent scenarios. Pure logic suggests. Yeah, Eddie interrupted, studying the holographic display. I got it. Space politics. Cool. Marcus watched nervously as the simulation began. Logos 7 immediately established optimal trade agreements, calculated alliance values, and began executing a flawless strategy that would, according to the probability displays, result in its faction's dominance by turn 35. Eddie spent the first 3 turns just watching. Not moving. Not choosing anything. Is he malfunctioning? Vex asked. He's thinking, Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure. On turn 4, Eddie made his first move, a trade agreement that seemed to benefit the other party significantly more than his own faction. Logos 7's probability of victory increased to 94%. By turn 10, Eddie had made several more apparently terrible decisions. He'd given away resources, refused profitable alliances, and invested in projects with minimal returns. Marcus buried his face in his hands. Then turn 15 happened. The first cascade began. One of Eddie's bad trades had given a minor faction just enough resources to challenge a major power. That conflict destabilized a trade route, which affected 3 other factions' economies, which created desperation that led to an alliance Eddie's faction was suddenly the perfect mediator for. Logos 7's probability of victory dropped to 76%. He's not playing the current game, Judge Kessler said suddenly, their quantum state fluctuating with what might have been excitement. He's seeding future games. By turn 25, the simulation had evolved into something Logos 7 hadn't predicted. Eddie's early mistakes had created a complex web of dependencies that all somehow converged to benefit his faction. He wasn't calculating optimal moves, he was creating conditions where optimal moves would emerge naturally. This is chaos theory, Vex said, and for the first time, Marcus heard something other than condescension in the alien's voice. It might have been awe. He's not fighting the system's complexity, he's weaponizing it. Turn 37, Eddie's faction had become indispensable. Not through dominance, but through relationships, obligations, and carefully constructed mutual dependencies. Logos 7 still had superior resources, but using them aggressively would collapse the entire system. Stalemate. Except it wasn't. On turn 43, a faction Eddie had barely interacted with suddenly proposed an alliance that shifted everything. Logos 7 hadn't seen it coming because it violated optimal strategy for that faction, but it made sense if you understood that faction's cultural values, which Eddie had somehow intuited from minimal data. How did you know they do that? Council Prime asked as Eddie's victory became mathematically certain. Eddie shrugged. They're described as honor-bound warrior culture, right? So I figured they'd eventually get tired of playing it safe. Warriors want to do warrior stuff. Just had to wait for them to get bored. That's not in the simulation parameters. No, but it's in the description. You gotta read between the lines, you know. The final turns played out with Eddie's victory solidified. Logos 7 had played perfectly according to logic. Eddie had played according to something else. Something that incorporated logic but wasn't limited by it. The chamber fell silent as the results displayed. Then Vex spoke, their geometric form pulsing with colors Marcus had never seen before. He's not illogical. He's multilogical. Operating on several logical frameworks simultaneously, mathematical, social, psychological, narrative, and integrating them in real time. Is that even possible? Council Prime asked. We just watched it happen, Judge Kessler replied. The question is, how? All eyes turned to Eddie, who was examining his fingernails casually. Dude, I don't know. I just think about what would make a good story. Like, what would be interesting? Things that are interesting usually happen because they make sense in some weird way, even if they don't make sense in a normal way. So I aim for interesting. Marcus blinked. You're telling me you won by asking yourself what would make a good narrative? Yeah. Stories work because they're about people, right? And people make sense if you understand their deal. Logic's just one part of their deal. Vex rotated slowly. He's using narrative causality as a predictive framework. That's not possible. Stories aren't real. Aren't they though? Eddie countered. Everything that happens is a story someone tells about it later. If you understand how stories work, you understand how people will interpret events, which affects how they'll respond. It's all connected, man. The council judges looked at each other, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of bewilderment. Marcus felt a smile growing. Eddie had done something incredible, he'd proven human cognition wasn't immune to logic. It was immune to single framework logic. Humans naturally processed multiple types of logic simultaneously, synthesizing them into something that looked like chaos but was actually highly sophisticated. They weren't illogical. They were metalogical. So, Eddie said, breaking the silence. Did we pass? The council judges requested a recess, something Marcus learned had happened only 3 times in galactic history. For 6 hours, Eddie and Marcus waited in an observation lounge while the galaxy's greatest minds processed what they'd witnessed. Eddie ordered something called a nebula fizz from the station bar and put his feet up. You think we're in trouble? I think we just broke their entire understanding of intelligence, Marcus said, nursing his own drink. So, maybe. Through the transparent walls, they watched ships from 1,000 worlds drift past, crystalline vessels that sang through space, organic ships that photosynthesized, and one transport that appeared to exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously. They're all so different, Eddie mused. But they all think they've figured out the one right way to think. Kinda sad. The rationalist imperium has existed for 3 million years without war, poverty, or conflict. Their way works. Sure, for them. But is that living or just existing efficiently? Before Marcus could respond, their communicators chimed. The council was reconvening. Back in the chamber, the judges seemed different somehow. Council Prime's crystalline structure had developed new facets, catching light in unfamiliar patterns. Vex's geometric form was less rigid, incorporating subtle curves. Even Kessler had stabilized into a more defined quantum state. We have analyzed the data, Council Prime began. And we find ourselves in unprecedented territory. Our original assessment was correct, humans are immune to logic. But incomplete. The full truth is more complex. The holographic display activated, showing neural scans of Eddie during the competition alongside Logos 7's processing patterns. Where the AI showed clean, linear decision trees, Eddie's brain lit up like a fireworks display, multiple regions activating simultaneously, creating connections that shouldn't exist. Logos 7 processes sequentially, even at quantum speeds, Vex explained. Logical step after logical step. Eddie's cognition is parallel and interconnected. He wasn't solving problems, he was dissolving the boundaries between different types of problems. Judge Kessler flickered between states rapidly. We modeled human consciousness extensively before your arrival. We concluded you were chaotic. We were wrong. You're not chaotic, you're operating in higher dimensional logical space. Like a three-dimensional being appears to behave impossibly to two-dimensional observers. Marcus leaned forward. So we're not immune to logic. Oh, you absolutely are, Council Prime said. Immune to our logic. We've been trying to analyze quantum computers using abacus frameworks. The issue isn't humanity's capacity, it's our limited vocabulary for describing your capacity. A new display appeared, showing the evolutionary history of Council species. We all evolved to optimize for single environmental pressures, Vex continued. My species competed for computational resources. The axiom collective formed in pure mathematics. The probability collective emerged from quantum foam. We each mastered our domain and assumed our solution was universal. But humans evolved in Earth's ecosystem, Judge Kessler said, competing against other humans who could predict your strategies. You needed unpredictability. Against persistence predators, you needed endurance. Against changing climates, you needed adaptability. Against complex social hierarchies, you needed emotional intelligence. Earth didn't let you specialize, it forced you to become generalists of cognition. Eddie raised his hand like a student. So we're not broken. You're not broken, Council Prime confirmed. You're comprehensive. Frustratingly, impossibly comprehensive. You can think in ways we cannot, see patterns we miss, find solutions in spaces we don't recognize as having solutions. Marcus felt decades of inferiority complex cracking apart. Then why the quarantine? The judges exchanged what might have been embarrassed glances. Because you're terrifying, Vex admitted. A species that can win games by vibing? That makes decisions based on narrative coherence. That can be simultaneously logical and emotional, rational and intuitive, analytical and creative. You're cognitive wild cards. We didn't know how to interact with you safely. Safely for whom? Marcus asked. For us, Council Prime said quietly. Every species in the Galactic Council achieved stability by embracing singular logical frameworks. It made us predictable, compatible, peaceful. Then humans arrived, demonstrating that maybe we'd sacrificed something vital for that stability. Creativity, Eddie said. You gave up being weird. Precisely. And watching you operate, winning through methods we consider impossible, forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth: our logic is incomplete. Perhaps deliberately so. We chose certainty over possibility. Judge Kessler solidified completely, something Marcus realized they rarely did. Your species proves that intelligence isn't a single optimal solution. It's a multidimensional spectrum. You're not immune to logic, you're immune to logical imprisonment. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled. So what now? Marcus asked. Council Prime's facets shifted, creating new patterns of light. Now we make a decision that might be the most illogical thing this council has done in 3 million years. The judges looked at each other, some form of consensus passing between them. We're going to learn from you. 6 months later, Earth's quarantine officially ended. Ships from 1,000 worlds began regular visits, but not for the trade and cultural exchange humanity had imagined. They came to learn. Marcus stood in what was now called the Institute for Applied Paradox Studies, a facility jointly operated by Earth and the Galactic Council. Inside, something unprecedented was happening. Humans were teaching aliens how to be illogical. Professor Lisa Okonkwo walked a class of crystalline axiom scholars through an exercise. Today we're studying Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong, will go wrong. Now, this is objectively false. Not everything that can go wrong does go wrong. But humans act as if it's true. An axiom student refracted confusion. Why would you operate under known false premises? Because Murphy's Law isn't about probability, it's about preparedness. By assuming the worst, we prepare for it. When things go right, we're pleasantly surprised. When they go wrong, we were ready. It's pessimistic optimism. That phrase is contradictory. Exactly. You're getting it. Down the hall, Eddie, now inexplicably humanity's most famous citizen, was teaching a different kind of class. A room full of beings from the rationalist imperium sat before him, looking deeply uncomfortable. Okay, today's lesson is about gut feelings, Eddie announced, writing the phrase on a holographic board. Sometimes you just know something without knowing how you know it. Your subconscious has processed patterns your conscious mind hasn't identified yet. That's just unconscious pattern recognition, a student protested. Not mystical. Right, exactly. But here's the thing, humans learned to trust that feeling even before we understood the mechanism. We made decisions based on, something feels off, and survived because of it. You all wait until you can explain the feeling. That delay can be costly. You're advocating for decision-making based on insufficient data. No, I'm advocating for recognizing that your intuition is data. Just in a format your conscious mind can't read yet. Vex, who'd taken up temporary residence on Earth, observed the class with fascination. The geometric entity had developed what humans called the hang of it, deliberately introducing minor inefficiencies into calculations to see what emerged. In the Institute's cafeteria, Marcus found Judge Kessler collapsed into a definite state, eating what appeared to be a sandwich. "How's the food?" Marcus asked. "Illogically delicious," Kessler replied. "I've been existing in quantum superposition for 17,000 years. I never understood what I was missing. The texture, the temperature, the way flavors combine unexpectedly, it's data processed through biological systems we've optimized away. Having regrets? Constantly. It's wonderfully destabilizing." Kessler took another bite. "Your species has shown us that efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes the scenic route teaches you more than the highway." Council Prime arrived, their crystalline form now incorporating what looked suspiciously like decorative fractals, purely aesthetic, serving no computational purpose. "Ambassador Webb, we need to discuss the latest reports from integrated colonies." Marcus tensed. "Problems?" "The opposite. Productivity in joint operations has increased 43%. Innovation rates have quadrupled. Species that haven't spoken in millennia are collaborating. Turns out when you allow beings to be weird, as Eddie says, remarkable things happen." "So the Council's happy?" "The Council is terrified and delighted in equal measure. We're experiencing feelings we'd optimized out of existence. It's chaos. Is that a problem?" Council Prime's facets shifted in what Marcus had learned was their version of a smile. "It's the solution. We'd achieved perfect order and called it paradise, but we'd really just created comfortable stagnation. You humans broke that. Showed us that growth requires a bit of chaos, that innovation needs a logic, that being alive means accepting paradox." Through the cafeteria windows, Marcus watched ships from across the galaxy landing at what had once been classified as humanity's quarantine zone. Now it was the most popular destination in known space, the planet where logic went to loosen up. Eddie joined them, carrying something that looked like blue pasta but probably wasn't. "Yo, Marcus. The Crystalline Confederation wants me to teach a course on productive procrastination." Is that a thing? Knowing you, you'll make it a thing. Sweet. As Eddie wandered off, Council Prime made a sound like wind chimes. We haven't revoked humanity's classification, you know. You're still officially immune to logic. I know, Marcus said. But now it's not a diagnosis, it's a job description. Precisely. The galaxy needs immune carriers, beings who can operate outside pure logic to solve problems pure logic cannot. You're chaos agents for a universe that had become too ordered. Vex approached, their geometric form now incorporating several non-Euclidean angles that served no purpose except looking cool. Ambassador, the rationalist Imperium has officially declared humans to be logically transcendent entities operating in metarational paradigms. Marcus laughed. That's just a fancy way of saying we're weird. Yes, Vex agreed. But it's the kind of weird the universe apparently needed. As the sun set over the Institute, painting the sky in illogical shades of orange and purple, Marcus reflected on humanity's journey. They'd been judged, quarantined, tested, and ultimately accepted, not despite their immunity to logic, but because of it. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Galactic Council was holding its first ever brainstorming session, a human concept involving gathering minds to generate ideas without immediately judging their feasibility. It was, by all traditional measures, a waste of time. It was also producing the Council's most innovative proposals in a million years. Humans hadn't changed to fit the galaxy. The galaxy had expanded to include humans. And in doing so, discovered that maybe logic wasn't the only path to truth. Sometimes you had to feel your way forward, trust your gut, take the scenic route, and believe that things would somehow work out. It was illogical. It was human. And apparently, it was exactly what the universe had been missing. Eddie passed by again, now wearing a t-shirt that read, "Immune to logic, fluent in chaos." He gave Marcus a thumbs up. Marcus returned it, thinking, only humanity could turn a terminal diagnosis into a badge of honor. Then again, that was kind of the point. The end.